Chinese Communist Party wants to help end the war. At least that's what they want us to believe. Are we falling for it? Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Shelley Zhang, filling in for Chris Chappell, who is building Legos in his childhood bedroom. Which sounds like a lot more fun than watching the news these days, but here we are. And if you're watching this, you're already way smarter than the New York Times. 2 weeks ago, we did this episode on how the Chinese Communist Party wants to turn Russia into North Korea. Take it away, Chris.
The Chinese Communist Party wants to be the world's go-between to help resolve the Russia issue. The same strategy China used with North Korea. You see, China is seen around the world as North Korea's only friend, which means if the rest of the world wants to get North Korea to do something, they have to go through China. Or Dennis Rodman.
Well, I don't know about Dennis Rodman, but the Chinese Communist Party is playing that exact same game now, only using Russia. We're not supporting Russia or North Korea. No. We're totally neutral. And only we can help resolve the situation. Just let us help. Which is exactly what it says in this opinion piece published by the New York Times. It starts off by talking about the devastation in Ukraine and how poorly things are going for Putin, which makes the situation more dangerous for everyone. But there's a solution. Unpalatable as some in the West may find the idea, it is time to offer the Russian leader an off-ramp with China's help. The author of this article is Wang Huiyao, also known as Henry Wang. According to the New York Times, Wang is the founder of a non-governmental think tank called the Center for China and Globalization, and he advises the Chinese government. The implication is that this guy has some influence on the Chinese leadership. So when he says that China wants to help, that must be true, right? Right? According to Wang, China is uniquely positioned to act as a neutral mediator between a Western-supported Ukraine and Russia. That sounds great. And if it doesn't sound great, you're just dumb. Wang calls the U.S. and its allies who might be reluctant to have China's help foolish and short-sighted. Because even Ukraine wants China's help. Sure, but Ukraine is being invaded right now. They would ask Dennis Rodman for help if they thought it made a difference. That shouldn't be taken as an endorsement of the Chinese regime. But there's a bigger problem with this opinion piece. Wang isn't just the founder of a non-governmental think tank, he's also part of the United Front, according to his own resume. The United Front Work Department is a Chinese Communist Party agency designed to shape the political discourse in foreign countries to more closely align with the party's interests. Chinese leader Xi Jinping has called it his magic weapon. I never want to have to say the words Xi Jinping and magic weapon in the same sentence again. But the point is, the United Front is there to neutralize overseas opposition to the Chinese Communist Party. And when you read this New York Times piece with that in mind, it all starts to make sense. It's full of language that's carefully calibrated to appeal to Western elites who have been waiting for China to finally be a responsible power, just like it always promised it would. For example, why would China want to be a neutral mediator between Russia and Ukraine? Doesn't it support Russia? Well, here's a gentle reminder that China doesn't just make money with Russia. It makes money with the West. China's trade with Russia is just a tenth of its combined trade with the US and the EU. China's trade with the West is so big. Hey, Western leaders, don't you want to keep making that sweet, sweet money with China? You know you do. But it's not just about the money. More after the break. Welcome back. Earlier this week, the New York Times published an op-ed that was straight-up Chinese propaganda meant to deceive and influence the West. The point was to make the Chinese Communist Party look like someone the West should trust to help negotiate with Russia. And hey, the article did make some good points, like the fact that Russia's invasion has been, in a lot of ways, bad for China. Because the longer the war lasts, the more it will reinvigorate the Western alliance around the idea of a values-based confrontation between East and West, bringing the United States and the European Union into even closer alignment while driving military budgets up around the globe. It's true that the Chinese Communist Party doesn't want Western alliances to get stronger, and it definitely doesn't want the West to wake up to the fact that we're in an ideological Cold War. But here's where the subtle propaganda slides in. The article explains that this isn't good for China, but it's not because they're in an ideological war with the West. No, it's because this makes it harder for China to maintain lucrative economic ties with the West and focus its resources on domestic development. Guys, we're not a threat. We just want to make money with the West and spend the rest of our time back here at home genociding the Uyghurs. We don't want to infiltrate and weaken liberal democracies while debt-trapping smaller nations. That's so not us. But it's not all subtle. Sometimes the propaganda just smacks you right in the face. Like when Wang talks about how mediating can help improve China's standing with the West despite its human rights violations, and how helping to end the war would make China seem like a great strategic partner for the West. Because, in the end, there's no better country to secure a resolution to this crisis than China. Reading this opinion article is kind of like watching one of those Asian makeup transformation videos. Everything looks great, and then you suddenly realize the girl had a fake nose the entire time. Look, I'm not mad the New York Times published this article. It can be useful seeing how the Chinese Communist Party is trying to manipulate the West. The problem with the New York Times piece is they didn't disclose Wang Huiyao's ties with the United Front, which have been widely known since at least 2018. And this is not the first time the Times has worked with Wang. Just last year, New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman spoke at Wang's think tank. That discussion was broadcast by Chinese state-run media and then used for Chinese propaganda as an example of a Western intellectual calling for improved relations between the US and China. Why do people like Thomas Friedman fall for it every time? Look, knowing Wang Huiyao is connected to the United Front makes it clearer that he's not sincere. He's disseminating the message the United Front wants to get out there as part of the Chinese Communist Party's strategy to neutralize its opposition. And that message is, the Chinese regime is nothing to worry about. They just want to help. It's all part of the plan to make sure that China is the ultimate winner of the Ukraine war. And there are definitely people out there buying what the Chinese Communist Party is selling. Take this letter to the editor published in the South China Morning Post. It's from Steve Orlins, the president of the National Committee on United States-China Relations. It's a nonprofit organization that promotes understanding and cooperation between the US and China. And parts of Orlins' letter look like they were copied from that United Front op-ed in the New York Times. First, he talks about how badly China has handled the Russian invasion and how this will have consequences. Policies toward China will be changed because China has shown it is not a constructive member of the international community. But don't worry, because China can snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. It is uniquely positioned to mediate a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. Well, I've heard that one before. But it's the next line that is truly nauseating. If the mediation succeeds, the world will credit China with being the responsible stakeholder we always hoped it would be. That's just delusional. Even if the effort fails, China will earn praise for trying and arrest the downward spiral in its relations with the US and the rest of the world. So even if it doesn't work out, China still wins. Let's give Orleans the benefit of the doubt and say that maybe he's just trying to get the Chinese regime to do the right thing by appealing to their self-interest. But that's not going to work because as far as the Chinese regime is concerned, they're already doing the right thing. I'll explain after the break. Welcome back. The Chinese Communist Party is trying to convince the West that it can be a responsible stakeholder, a neutral mediator between Ukraine and Russia. Yes, we're talking about the country that has embraced Russian war propaganda and, according to the US, has signaled openness to providing Russia with military support. Not exactly the actions of a neutral mediator. But while China's Western-facing propaganda seems to indicate that all it wants is to help achieve world peace, its internal domestic propaganda is saying something a little different. This is an editorial published in the People's Daily, the official newspaper of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, don't get me wrong, it still says China is totally the best, most responsible country ever, that stands on the side of peace, cooperation, fairness, and justice. But here's where domestic propaganda gets a little more spicy, by accusing America of being the instigator of the Ukraine crisis. And also evil. Especially with their sanctions that cause human rights violations. Well, that's a neat twist. The US sanctions countries like Russia and China because these countries have committed human rights violations, like in China's case, genocide. But according to the People's Daily, it's the sanctions that are the genocide. Let's not forget, China is the real victim here. But this shows exactly why trying to persuade the Chinese Communist Party to do the right thing isn't going to work. The Communist Party doesn't want to do the right thing. It wants to do what it wants to do. And then it will use propaganda to convince you that whatever it does is the right thing. And yet, the West falls for it every time. And now it's time for me to answer a question from a fan who supports China Uncensored on the crowdfunding website Patreon or the social media platform Locals. From Patreon, Jim Bulger asks, do you think China will take Biden's sanctions-only response to Russia as a go-ahead to move into Taiwan? Well, Jim, not really. I don't think the U.S. has to respond militarily in Ukraine to deter the Chinese Communist Party from invading Taiwan. And the Chinese regime hates the West's sanctions. That's why they've been condemning sanctions so much in their propaganda. If the U.S. and Europe sanctioned China the way they've sanctioned Russia in the last 2 weeks, it would devastate China's economy. The Chinese Communist Party is trying to develop ways to be sanctions-proof, but they're not there yet. Right now, they're vulnerable, and they know it. Thanks for your question, Jim. And thanks to all of you who support China Uncensored by contributing $1 or more per episode through the crowdfunding website Patreon. Visit patreon.com/China Uncensored to learn more. Once again, I'm Shelley Zhang, filling in for Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.